Welcome to School Talk. I'm Nadja Varney, your host. The topic we're talking about today, it's not sensational, it's not in the news, but it should be. We're talking about literacy and reading, the foundation for all other learning. So let's talk about reading and literacy development. My guest today is Dr. Nancy Witherell. She's the past president of the Massachusetts Reading Association, and currently she's the Mass co-coordinator of the International Literacy Association. She's also a professor at Bridgewater State University and an old friend of School Talks. Welcome back, Nancy.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, Nasha. I really appreciate it.
Well, Dr. Witherell, you have been everywhere with reading, and that's why I'm so delighted when you come. You've taught in the classroom, you've worked with student teachers, you've taught at higher education, you're working with the International Reading Association. So with all the opinions out there in the world, I really value yours, so thank you.
Thank you.
You hear today a great deal, we all do, about testing, standardized testing and high stakes testing. And you don't hear that much about literacy and reading, and those are the tools that help them learn all the rest of it. So let's go right down to the beginning. When would you say a child's reading and literacy development begins? I'm sure it doesn't begin when they're tested in grade 1. So when does it begin?
Some people would argue that it begins in the womb, but I wouldn't go quite that far. But I think Nashi, it begins with oral language. The ability to hear and understand, the ability to talk and communicate and to send your own messages. So literacy actually begins with oral language, and that's where, if you remember, Put Reading First, which has been around for a while and it's kind of phasing out at this point, they didn't put oral language into their program at all. And I think that probably was a minus for that particular program. But the more we talk to children, the more they talk to us, the more vocabulary they know. When they hit the words, when they begin to read the text, they're going to be able to comprehend and understand what they're reading.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Without a context, and that leads me to this. What are the implications for children who come from poverty, and also for minority groups where there's supposedly this big gap? What about those children?
The gap does exist. The low socioeconomic status would mean that parents may not have the books in the house. They may not have the ability to help their children. They may not have the time to help their children.
Some of them are working two and three
jobs. They don't have the time. They may also be diversified. They may have a different language and can't help their child, with particular literacy skills. Mm-hmm. And so that does really affect the gap. And, research has shown that for many years now that, that's definitely a big problem. And, putting, No Child Left Behind, Put Reading First was supposed to help solve that, along with, other programs that come out. And we're not there yet, but, there has been some decrease in the gap, but not significant.
Well, when you say we're not there yet, as you know, I was a reading specialist for almost 30 years and did workshops for teachers and a lot of parent work. And to hear we're not there yet, it's really heavy to hear that, isn't it?
It is.
Because there's so much money in education, and it has not really, obviously, been poured into the right spots.
I agree with you 100%.
Because we know that early, what you just said, the listening and speaking is the beginning of reading and writing.
That's right.
So I think of the past now. There used to be in kindergarten and preschool, but especially so interested now in kindergarten as well as preschool, we used to have a strong emphasis on socialization, on hands-on. There was a book by Sharp called Learning is Child's Play. Remember the old books, David Elkind's Hurried Child, and all the Piaget stages. So we knew children needed time. So I'm going to ask you, how have the expectations for literacy in early childhood, how have they changed now?
For many of us, they are where your heart is. Children can learn through play. They can learn vocabulary. They can write postcards. They can do all kinds of things, all through play. The Common Core and the push to I guess, be the best nation. I'm not sure what the push is exactly.
Means, right. Yeah.
You know, has changed a lot of that to where it's hard to even know whether children have time to be children. You know, the fun has gone out of school. You know, and there should be fun in school. There should be fun in learning. What's odd is if we're going to go back to history, I'm going to say 30 years ago is when school systems in this area anyway began to change the entrance date. If you remember, a child had to be 5 by, let's say, June 1st in order to go into kindergarten. And then it began, child had to be 5 by September 1st in order to go into kindergarten.
Yes.
Because they said that they weren't developmentally ready. And so now, if you look at it, they go into kindergarten and they're that same age and they're being pushed to learn a lot. I didn't agree with the changing of the entrance date. That was not something research even supported. It, you know, depends on the individual child. But now it doesn't matter. They can go in at 6 in kindergarten, where some of them would have been 5, and they're being pushed to what they would have learned anyway.
It's almost like redshirting in sports, you know, where they keep kids back so they'll be bigger the next year, just making them 6 instead of 5. But even at 5 or 6, I'm just going to read this. It's still controversial. There's, in fact, in Education Week, a recent issue this year, the headline says, "The debate persists around kindergarten reading standards." And I'll just read a little by this Liana Haitlin, who wrote this, or Haitlin, she wrote this. She said, do the standards ask too much of 5 and 6-year-olds in reading? At the heart of this dispute is a literacy standard that says kindergartners should be able to, quote, read emergent reader texts with purpose and understanding. A kindergartner is to read emergent texts. That assumes an awful lot, as what you talked about, language development, vocabulary, that all to be able to read that. Do you think that that's a fair or a good expectation?
I think it's a bit of a dream.
Thank you for being so honest. It is a dream.
There are, though,
There's some children. who
that's
can't.
right, and
Yeah.
they deserve that chance. You know, a standard should be what it is. It's where we adhere to what we're trying to get to. So if a child has the ability to be able to read and understand and communicate that text, then they should be allowed to do that. That, you know, every child needs to be given the opportunity to learn. So if you have a child in kindergarten who's already reading, and now that child has to sit and learn letters, that's not fair either. And so, yeah, is the standard high? It really is. But can it be achieved by some students? Yes. By all, that would be very difficult.
I think that you've just hit on, to me, a real point, that we have these standards called proficient, because you're this age and you're in this grade. And everything, anyone who's taken Psychology 101, we know that they all have different rates of learning, they have different styles of learning, the background of experience. I mean, you know, you and I have talked about this with teachers for years. And I think maybe I shouldn't editorialize, but I think maybe the problem is whoever is setting these standards isn't talking enough to classroom teachers. You know, it's coming from representatives from government and from other places.
You know, recently there's been a lot of meetings just on that topic.
On the topic of?
Well, the fact that, going into a little bit of the park, that the new assessment that we may or may not be adopting in Massachusetts is in the fact that teachers and educators are not being able to give enough input. You know, I was thinking the other day, we all walk over a bridge, we walk under bridges, but there's no way I'm going to tell an engineer how to build one.
Thank you, that's wonderful. We walk over bridges and so forth, but we don't tell the engineer how to build them. So somebody ought to be talking to the teachers.
Yes, exactly.
We see these children from all day long and work with them. So you're hearing more discussion about that? That teachers are
Well, there's
speaking
been,
about-
in this state anyway, there has been some open forum meetings where they're talking about the park exam.
just about that.
Yeah, about that, but at least now they're asking teachers. Actually, last week, the House passed a bill by a really small margin of like 5. It was, 5
Close.
votes different about revamping No Child Left Behind. And in that bill, it states that they're supposed to go and ask and get the input of teachers and superintendents. And whether that's why there was a low margin, I'm not sure. But they even actually, in that new, in the bill that was passed, they talked about being able to opt out of testing.
That's something that's happening all over the country, not so much in Massachusetts or New England, but from what I've been reading, there are some very large groups of parents. And if you take out enough students from the testing situation, the results are not valid. So, if you have 85% of your students staying home, that's quite a rebellious act to say this is not going to work. And just while we're on that, I just want to take a small tangent to the fact that the tests are being so pushed. Do you see that the teachers are losing some of the creativity and the excitement and the creative thinking in these lower grades especially?
I have no doubt. The push on the testing, whether it's the MCAS or the PARC, or Smarter Balance, I'm sure.
Or any of the tests throughout the country, they're all similar.
It takes time in the classroom. There's so much test prep going on. I don't even know if they're teaching science. You'll say to teachers, we don't have time to teach science. It's like, hello, that's where you get a lot of your exploration and your creative thinking. And, they're going for high test scores. I don't know if you've heard of the PISA, but the PISA is it's Performance for International Students, Program for International Student Assessment. And we're not high on that. We've never been high on the PISA. But somehow we made Steve Jobs, we made Bill Gates.
Yes. Right.
I was looking up the 2012 results of the PISA, and the highest nations were China, Singapore, and Hong Kong, which was odd because it's been said it would be Finland. It has been Finland for years.
Exactly, I remember that.
And all of a sudden now it's changed, and does a test mean that they can memorize better? Maybe, but can they create? Not necessarily. We don't know that.
That is an excellent point. Our country is the country of creating everything, and other countries often steal it or buy it, whatever. And so there is something very unique about American public education, and I believe so strongly in it. I don't believe that privatization would really make it any better. I think that we need to go back, not back, but keep moving forward with what we already know about the human child and development. So there's so much pressure right now about the testing, as you talked about. I read here, the states are all putting in policies. This was another article in Education Week talking about early grades crucial in the path to reading proficiency. They talk about it, and we make policies, and they're supposed to be able, some of these standards say that the third grade marks a major year of transition. But everybody that hits third grade, do you think they're all exactly ready at that moment, for the transition to reading to learn, as we say in fourth grade?
What I explain to my pre-service teachers, Najee, is that we can see a little kid's hand grow. We can watch it grow from a little foot handprint to a bigger handprint. We can't see the brain. So we don't know where they are developmentally and whether, what they're ready for. I think the standards are trying to go for a higher norm, but it's not necessarily where everybody is at that time.
Thank you. And the word norm is the working word there, looking for a norm. But we need to take a break right now. But we'll be right back. Stay with us. There's more stuff coming up, and it's very important, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a taxpayer supporting our schools. We'll be right back.
Michael Adams?
Here.
Michael Adams.
Here.
Michael Adams.
Students who miss 18 days of school in any grade risk falling behind and not graduating. Absences add up.
Dr. Witherell, just before the break, we were talking about how we expect everyone to reach the norm or better, and we put people on a curve. And you also mentioned a little bit about some of the testing that's international, and it shows other nations like a China or Hong Kong or that they are beating us on scores. But I think I remember people like early reading people like Dr. Durrell and others saying children are not widgets and they cannot be measured in a factory model. So I'm going to ask you, if children can't all come up to this norm, what are the challenges in the preschool and in kindergarten? What are they doing? I mean, there are children with non-English speaking families. There are children coming off from another country. So what's happening to help these children have to reach this proficiency, this norm? What's happening to help them?
I'm not an expert on early ed and care, so I would go from a little bit beyond that. But
you're thinking.
when we talk about the early ed and care, and we talk about the little children, you also have to take in the fact that many of them are coming in with, maybe alcohol syndrome, the fetal syndrome.
Oh.
You've got, 1 out of every 1,000 is now autistic. You've got that along with, learning disabilities, the English language learners, and the behavioral issues. And I think personally that's accelerated in the last 20 years, whether they're being identified better and, or whether there are more, and I think it's a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. And so, teachers, whether they're in preschool or in 4th grade, are dealing with different issues than they ever had to before. And yeah, it does cause a problem with teaching. It causes a problem with interruptions in the classroom, and it causes a problem because every child learns differently, as we discussed. And just because a child may have this particular problem doesn't mean the child can't learn. It depends on whether or not the child's being taught in a way that he or she can learn.
Now that leads me, what you just said is so pivotal to me, that it leads to how that child, how that child is taught and how the teaching learning thing happens with that child, each one of them. But we have mandated curriculum standards. I tell you, I was shocked. I haven't been in the classroom for a while, but one of my friends who is teaching, she said she has to sit with this book and read the bold print. And this is an experienced teacher who has many, ideas in her little bag of tricks, but she's mandated to do that. And one day the little boy, one of her little boys looked up and said, "Mrs. So-and-so, why do you always have to read from that book?" And I think she was thinking, I'm thinking the same thing, So I'm wondering, adjusting to that curriculum, how are teachers feeling and what are they doing to meet the needs?
I think it depends on the school district. If you think about it, Najee, scripted books or teacher editions are not new. When I began teaching in the 70s, they were scripted, you read the bold, but you could get away without following it quite so much. Now, if something goes wrong with the child's learning, they would say that, well, you didn't stick to the integrity of the program.
But excuse me for interrupting, but those were mostly basal books that had, through several books, they were not, they don't end with a big test that determines whether you're proficient, whether your teacher's proficient, whether your school is a failing school. I mean, it was just helping you to help that child through another series of books.
Yes.
So I think that's a little different from...
It depends on the program. It depends on the program. There are some programs out there that, with those bolded scripts, actually, they also mandate grouping. Level groups, reciprocal teaching groups, skills groups. So it totally depends on the program.
And the teacher.
And the teachers. Doesn't seem to be a teacher anymore. In the classroom you go in, often there's more than one teacher, especially during literacy block.
Talk about that. What is
a lot
happening?
of the schools in the area here have adopted reading programs that basically mandate a reading coach. Now, how the district does it depends on the district. Sometimes there's a reading coach between 4 schools, and sometimes there's a reading coach or 2 at each school. So it totally depends on the district and, of course, the finances that the district has. But then the coach, there'll be a classroom where there's a teacher and a special ed teacher, both of them with a group, maybe a teacher's aide, paraprofessional with a group. And so then the kids are getting more than they would with just 1 to 30. They've got 1 to 6, or 1 to 7. And the teacher, herself or himself gets to know that child more. But when you're teaching 30 with one and you've got a scripted program and everybody's supposed to be on the same page at the same time, it's not going to work well, because you have some children who are struggling to learn, and then you have the more advanced students who are not giving a chance to learn.
Because they're not given the proper
That's right, they're not being
opportunities to-
challenged.
I was shocked again, a second grade teacher that I taught with, and we just did so many creative things, and we did have tests. I mean, this whole idea of testing is something new. Forever we have had some kind of, I can't even think of all the names, but there were oral grade tests all the way to metropolitan standardized tests. There were all kinds of testing.
Iowa
but
test,
they
the
were
basic skills.
all of these,
Yes.
yes. And we had the kind of testing that tested individually. When I was a resource person, every teacher in my school knew how to give personal inventories before she placed them. I didn't walk in and say, this child finished this book, now she goes to that book. Everybody should be learning how to assess and diagnose. But now the thing that I'm so concerned about is that the test determines the child's next step, the teacher's accreditation, the school's approval. So I'm wondering how that's affected the teachers.
Now, are you talking MCAS, the park?
Well, any of the forced or mandated testing, whatever it is.
The one thing that Put Reading First did for us, I think, was the progress monitoring. But the progress monitoring is individual. And if you can see in progress monitor that this child needs the sound of D, then you can work with that child. But when you're talking about something like the MCAS, where it's supposed to test the school and not the child, then it's not going to be helpful for the teacher, and the teacher can actually get more information from some type of informal assessment.
Exactly.
And be able to take that child from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 much, in a much faster and more effective way, efficient way.
I've been interviewing Dr. Oakers, who's was at Rhode Island College, but he's now emeritus and is doing workshops and on project-based learning. And that
Fun.
takes away a lot of this. Everybody does the same thing. And the children score as well when the children are engaged and involved in the whole issue of learning around a topic that they are excited about. And this idea that if he knows the D sound or the G sound with, after G with an I after it or an E, I mean, all these rules. I shouldn't go on and on here, but I remember in kindergarten I was the reading specialist and tested this little boy during recess, and he came up and he could read third grade level, books and so forth. And when we went back to his room, they were gone. He cried and cried because recess and his snack was far more important to him, So, I mean, we have to understand that just because a child can read, an advanced reader, he's still a little child. And the child that is not able to read, it doesn't reflect that this child can't ever learn to read.
That's right.
I just don't know how we're going to get the flexibility, get the money to make that happen, and the education of teachers. Maybe I should go to that because the teachers are major. I mean, it's an art and a science. It's not you just go and learn how to say certain things and the children will learn, You and I know that. So what's happening with teacher training, or I hate that word training, it's like training a dog. I always like to say professional development or educating teachers.
With the pre-service and the in-service, they've all had to take SEI courses.
What does that mean?
Sheltered English Immersion.
Say that again, please.
Sheltered English Immersion.
Oh,
so that they-
sheltered English.
Yes.
Now, what is sheltered English?
It's
Immersion.
basically bilingual education in being able to work with someone who is bilingual and being able to take a non-native English speaker, which is also defined as somebody who may have been brought up speaking English, but his or her parents at home speaking another language. Okay, so it's being able to make a different type of approach for them. So differentiation for that particular non-English or ELL student. It may be something like putting a visual on a paper that they're doing, or some type of visual on some type of poster the teacher's using, so that'll help the child understand what exactly is going on in that particular text.
I think I heard with sheltered reading instruction that it's often speaking more slowly,
Can be.
and that I mean it's kind of many things. It's not just something to explain the word on the page, but it's also a way that the teachers work with them. Is that true?
It's part of it. It is part of it. Menashe, you and I both are reading specialists, so we understand a lot of effective ways of teaching reading.
And nobody had to put it in a book for us.
Well, there were books,
There were
but
books.
we learned on our own also.
Experience, I'm saying, helps so much.
That's right. And in essence, when they talk about sheltered English immersion, they're doing a little bit more than that, making sure that they use visuals. You know, you can say, this is a cup, but you can say cup, and that child is going to grab that vocabulary much more. Where if you say to a child who's been brought up speaking English the word cup, they're going to know what it is. And so there's a little bit more of an expertise type of techniques that they use for the English language learner.
Which would be something that and I did have students back then, we didn't have bilingual. I started the first remedial reading program in my town, and I had a young man who came in at age 8 from Italy, had 2 children from Finland, and so I know what you're talking about. We need to wind up. Our time is just about gone. If you could say one thing about what you're most hopeful about in just 30 seconds, what would you say?
If I was to say
very
anything about
quickly?
my most hopeful, I think it's with the Common Core. Only because it has, well, not only because, but one of the reasons, not that it's a favorite of mine, but it has brought in informational text to the classroom.
Okay, we didn't get to talk about that point, but that's a good way to end, that we're not just reading fiction in early grades.
That's right.
And that there's something to that, but there are other things about Common Core. We'll have to talk again.
Yes.
We're not giving a blanket, credit to that or confirmation to it. But we do need to close. But thank you so much, Dr. Nancy Witherell.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn to the camera and our audience to say, in this technological information age, whether you're reading from a book or from a screen, you have to know how to read. It's the foundation for everything else. So let's support literacy and the teachers of reading, and we'll do our part here on our conversation about reading, which I call School Talk.